Thank you very much, and welcome to Broadway Buzz. My name is Joe Gary, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the opening of our season with a brilliant production of Bullets Over Broadway. You know, it's an amazing show. Sort of think a little bit Guys and Dolls. Think a little bit about every backstage musical you've ever seen, like Curtains or Kiss Me Kate or Chorus Line. It's a wonderful and delightful show set in 1929 New York. And so this is the time of Al Capone. This is the time of bathtub gin. This is the time of the beginning of the earliest form of musical comedy. And what you're seeing in Bullets Over Broadway is a kind of parody of those musicals from that period. When you have Woody Allen writing wonderful material for the musical, when you have Susan Stroman directing and choreographing the show, so you feel like you're in an Art Nouveau calendar, it's an extraordinary evening. The music is perfect. It's a jukebox musical, and it takes some of the best music from the 1920s. So you have a little bit of Cole Porter, a little bit of Bessie Smith, and a little bit of Hoagy Carmichael all mixed together. You will hear songs delivered in a way that will totally transform the song for you. I won't give away any of the secrets, but it's a great delight. For those of you who were fans of the movie of Bullets Over Broadway, I think that this is a much superior version of the story, and I'll talk about why in a few moments. But first of all, let's look at our hero, Woody Allen. Woody Allen is an extraordinary and very enigmatic figure. Keep in mind, he's been called one of the greatest comics of the century. He's compared to Buster Keaton. He's compared to Charlie Chaplin, the sort of extraordinary, nebbish, neurotic, quiet little man with fuzzy hair, big glasses, who hesitates endlessly, who only talks about his psychiatrist. This is the persona of Woody Allen. But he's been one of our greatest comics, and I want to talk to you about how this really young man invented himself. So let's go back to the early 1950s. Woody Allen came from a very poor Jewish family. The family sort of lived with other members of the family, so they were all jammed together in a small apartment where the big aim was to get up earliest so you could be the first in the bathroom. It was a very tight, intimate family group. And Woody Allen was always sort of introspective and quiet and sort of unlike everyone else in his family. When he went to school, he was shy, thin, short, wore very big glasses, and wanted to have a sense. He wanted to have a persona. So he invented a sort of comic figure. And very early on, when he was in high school, he started writing jokes. And this is the beginning of Woody Allen's brilliant career. Keep in mind, jokes, one-line jokes, jokes set up in 2 or 3 lines, has always been the hallmark of Woody Allen. If you have forgotten those brilliant years when he was a great stand-up comic, all of those great performances are still on audio, and you can go back and be dazzled by them. They're as pertinent today as when he wrote them over 50 years ago, because he wrote about the human condition. So, okay, here is this young boy trying to make a name for himself. Obviously, it couldn't be in sports, even though he loved sports. So he decided to write jokes. And when he was a senior in high school, he started sending his jokes to the leading columnists in the New York papers. So Earl Wilson would receive like 60 jokes from a young boy signed Woody Allen. And so he said, these jokes are extraordinary. And all of the writers started using one-liners from Woody Allen, but then attributing the fact that they came from this young kid who was writing this fabulous material. Very quickly, agents sort of got to him, and Abe Burrows, who was one of the great writers of the day, read 60 of his jokes, and he said, 59 of these jokes are better than the material I use. This kid is fantastic. And he was exceedingly prolific. I mean, in an afternoon, he would sit down and write 100 jokes. And this went on day after day after day. So what happened was he finally found someone who started representing him. Keep in mind, he's a senior in high school living in a very poor family. Suddenly, he's making more money than the entire family with his jokes. And they started passing the jokes around. So people with television shows, especially talk shows, always needed good one-liners to end a sequence, etc. And so they started using Woody Allen's jokes. And famous people who wanted to be quoted and have a great one-line zinger, Woody Allen would provide it. And so the end result is, very early on, as this young boy, he invented himself as a very funny writer. Now keep in mind, this is a kid who was almost nearly illiterate. He never went to school. I mean, he would miss school and see a movie 3 times in an afternoon. I mean, movies literally represented his life. Movies and sports, that was his life. And so listening to the games on the radio and then seeing movies, that was the world he lived in to isolate himself from this sort of immense commune that he was living in with his family. So from there, Abe Burrows said to him, you know, you have much too much talent just to be writing one-line jokes. So he got him involved in a program with the recording studios in New York where they started training young writers to write comic skits. And so he started writing for early television. As you remember, in the 50s going into the 60s, we had all of the great stand-up comics performing on comic variety shows on television. And so he would write for Jackie Gleason, he would write for Sid Caesar, he would write for Gary Moore. And I want you to understand, when people were writing skits for television, it still works the same way. Even on the comedy series you watch, they will have a group sometimes of 10 writers, and they will all gather in a room and they'd say, okay, Sid Caesar wants to do a skit about going into a donut shop. And so they would do all these takes on what it's like to go into a donut shop. And so they said, well, if it's a Polish donut shop and the owner doesn't speak English, maybe that would be funny. And so they add all these ingredients to the skit. And so Woody Allen worked in that group of sort of young writers contributing ideas. Keep in mind, the young writers included Mel Brooks and a whole range of brilliant writers at this period. So he became a sort of a star of writing skits. Keep in mind, the importance of the skit is to quickly establish character and situation. What makes humor is putting a character in a situation. And it sometimes is a situation that's funny, sometimes it's the character in the situation that's funny, and so the end result is that the writer starts to become very sensitive to the ingredients of what theater is really about, putting character in a situation. So he became a master of this early on. So by the early 60s, a young, very young, uneducated Woody Allen is making $1,700 a week. He's supporting his whole family, and he's sort of at the top of his form. But what he realized is that no one would ever know who he was if he just continued to do this. Of course, there were writers that have done that all their career, and we never know who they are. I mean, we remember Imogene Coca or Sid Caesar or Milton Berle, but we never know about the writers that made them so funny. So at the high point of this very young career, Woody Allen said to his agents at the time, these are 2 men that would follow him through his entire career, and he said to them, you know, what else can I do so that people know who Woody Allen is? And they said, well, you have to do stand-up comedy. And at the time, Woody Allen deeply admired Mort Sahl, if you remember him. And he would transform, Mort Sahl would transform stand-up comedy so it would have much more meaning. I mean, the old comedy was sort of out of burlesque. The old comic who would come out between burlesque skits in the 20s on Broadway and tell bawdy stories or dirty stories or blue stories, and that was the form of stand-up comedy. But Mort Sahl brought it to a new dimension where he made the idea of the world we live in very important and the politics around our world and what was happening, and he made comedy pertinent. And so Woody Allen adored Mort Sahl, and you know, he was really his idol. Also, ironically, he adored Bob Hope. And remember, Bob Hope would do those brilliant one-liners, and he was a master of doing that. And you remember the old movies he would make with Bing Crosby, On the Road to Rio, etc. And so in a way, when you watch Bullets Over Broadway, it is not unlike one of those early movies. It's very slapstick, it's very exaggerated, they're very heightened characters, but they're all honed in a very, very refined way to make this a wonderful comedy machine that you're going to be seeing tonight. Okay, so Woody Allen then wanted to step into this world, but the one problem was, number one, he's enormously shy. He would rather stare at the floor than say hello to anyone. He would walk away from seeing a friend because it meant he had to engage himself. So he was so incredibly shy that it literally took a whole year to get him in a position where he could be on stage without wanting to run off and vomit in the wings. He was so terrified. And so the agents suddenly went from having him make $1,700 a week as a very slick skit writer for television, and they helped to develop him as a comic stand-up. Now, one of his first jobs was in 1960 at the Blue Angel. And when he went there, Dick Cavett was there, and he did a wonderful report about it. And he said, this skinny little shy man walked out on the stage. And keep in mind, this is the antithesis of what comics were like in the day. This is the same period that Phyllis Diller is being developed, and Tom Lear, et cetera. And so they were big and open and connected with the audience, and they were sassy. And then suddenly this little nebbish man walked out on the stage, and you really had to lean forward to listen to what he was saying, and then he would hesitate and pause in an awkward way, and he would tell us stories. But the stories were so enormously funny that it was very clear that we had to perceive stand-up comedy in a new way. And Woody Allen would literally transform that. So when you see this show tonight, there are jokes embedded everywhere, but they're wonderfully done, and they're great jokes that pay off. For example, in the lyrics, listen carefully to the lyrics tonight, because the show is a jukebox musical, and it takes songs from the period from the 20s to the early 30s. But he changes what the song means, and it's so funny. One, it's a parody of the music itself, it's a parody of the time, but then the one-liners that he puts into the music, into the lyrics, changing them, are really so right for the character, so right for the situation. It makes it one of the most organic jukebox musicals that's really ever been written. So he uses that tradition of the joke very well. Also, watch in the show all the little situations that happen. The story is about a gangster, sort of like Al Capone, who has a girlfriend who's sort of a sleazy stripper, and her only claim to fame is that once in burlesque she played Lady Macbeth in pasties. That's her only theatrical training, and so she wants to be a Broadway star. So the premise of this story is the gangster is the only investor in a show that nobody else will produce, with the caveat that his girlfriend plays one of the major roles, but not in pasties, so don't worry. So the end result is it becomes an enormously funny story of mixing these strange worlds together, the worlds of gangsters, the world of the theater, and these sort of conflicting worlds coming together in a very funny way. So Woody Allen uses all of his tradition. Keep in mind, in sketch writing, you've got to set something up quickly. For those of you who are devotees of late-night television, you know that the great hosts had that ability to set up a situation so quickly so that you knew what it was going to be and then create a character and make it very funny. Woody Allen does that all through the show. Watch for that as the story progresses. And just another note about the music. I mean, there's a great song that you all know. There'll be some changes made, and we can all sing every lyric of that song. But in this show, the gangsters are sort of saying to someone who's playing around with the boss's girlfriend, there are going to be serious changes made in your face, in your body, in your knees, and finally, what's it going to be like when you don't have a head? So, I mean, and we laugh hysterically at this darkness in the way it's developed. And there is one of the funniest, bawdiest songs in the show, so prepare yourself. In the old days, in the 1920s going into the 1930s, we still had the tradition of burlesque in the variety shows. Even in the Ziegfeld Follies, Fanny Brice would come out and tell very blue stories or very blue jokes. as would all the great comics of the period. And sometimes they would have bawdy songs. You know, Sophie Tucker, Belle Barth all sang these raucous songs. Well, there's a song in this show that would make Mae West blush. And it's called the Hot Dog Song. So you're never going to think of hot dogs the same way after you hear this song. It's enormously funny, and it's sort of the chorus girl's audition for the producer and the writer, and she does what she thinks is a wonderful number, and of course it's absolutely outrageous and enormously funny, and blue. Okay, so watch for that. So, all right, so Woody Allen then has this career as a stand-up comic, as one of the foremost comics of the century, and then he goes on and becomes a screenwriter, a screen director, a screen actor. He's created over 40 movies. He sort of learned how to make a movie as he was doing it, but nevertheless, they're enormously funny. Most recently, Blue Jasmine was an enormous success recently, and Midnight in Paris was a great success. But he has a body of great things like Annie Hall and Hannah and Her Sisters and Manhattan, which is the ultimate tribute to Broadway. So that's been an enormous career. And aside from all that, now keep in mind, he went to film school for about 3 weeks and dropped out. So he learned by doing it. The other thing is that's so interesting about Woody Allen is he then went to the stage and he became a playwright. His earliest works were Don't Drink the Water, which exists in movie version. You can see Jackie Gleason do it. Actually, it's playing right now on Netflix. But also there was another version with Michael J. Fox that also starred Woody Allen. It's an enormously funny movie. And then he did Play It Again, Sam, which is a takeoff on the great Casablanca movie. And that's enormously funny also. It starred Diane Keaton and Woody Allen. So, you know, you have a whole body of things to look for. I want to tell you one story about him that is sort of autobiographical as it applies to the show you're seeing tonight. In real life, when Woody Allen wanted to make a movie, he was hired by Hollywood, which was a terrible mistake because keep in mind, Woody Allen is a loner. He does everything on his own. He breaks all the rules. He only does it his way or he doesn't do it. And so Hollywood came to him and said, at the height of his success as a stage comic, and they said, we want you to write the screenplay for What's New, Pussycat. So he did. And he thought it would be treated like gold. They would honor every word, set up every joke, that he would consult on everything. Nobody paid any attention to him. They ripped the script apart, changed it completely, and the movie became an enormous success, and it made Woody Allen a star as a screenwriter. But he really had very little to do with the script he wrote, and he never got over that. He thought it was so immoral that he was being praised for a script that he hated that obviously made him a star. So when you watch the show tonight, there's a young playwright who goes through a similar thing. He comes in with a play that he cherishes, and the play gets changed and mutilated and altered very significantly and becomes a great success. So that is really a very autobiographical aspect of Woody Allen's life. I do want to tell you that after that, Woody Allen pledged never to do another Hollywood movie, and he never did. And all the rest of the 40 movies he made, they were financed independently. He was not accountable to anyone. He just made the movie he wanted to make. And he directed it. He oversaw the camera. He edited it. He was responsible for every aspect of the movie. So he is this kind of perfectionist. Okay, so this takes us to Bullets Over Broadway. It was first done as a movie in 1993. It was in the whole development of, he creates a movie every year. And so in 1993, this was his movie. It's a very accessible movie. Some of you don't like Woody Allen because he gets a little too neurotic, a little too self-indulgent, a little too much whining, a little too much me, me, me. But Bullets Over Broadway is not like that at all. It's just a very funny story set in the late 20s in the period of Al Capone and the development of the Broadway musical. Keep in mind, this is a period of Cole Porter, Irving Berlin. So it's a very rich period where early musical comedy is being developed. So the movie is enormously funny. It was very successful. I really recommend that you see it sometime. Diane Wiest played the diva actress who won an Academy Award, and deservedly so, for an absolutely over-the-top, outrageous performance. It parodies theater in the most extraordinary way. Okay, so the movie is a great success. About 10 years later, so we're into the early 2000s, 2002, 2003, Woody Allen's sister, who has produced all of his work, encouraged him very strongly to consider making a musical out of Bullets Over Broadway. It was a perfect choice and a great idea. He worked with Marvin Hamlisch, the great composer who wrote Chorus Line, and they worked for 2 years on it, but Woody Allen rejected every song that Marvin Hamlisch wrote. So, and wouldn't it be wonderful to go back and hear those songs now? But in any case, they're lost to us. And the end result was the project died. Early, and then in between there, remember, Mel Brooks went ahead and took his movie, The Producers, and turned it into a smash success. So again, Woody Allen's sister is saying to him, the time now is 2012, moving into 2013. You know, you've really made a terrible mistake. Bullets Over Broadway is perfect. It's a backstage show. Musicals love that. The period is great, the late 1920s. You can have great music, great dancing in the show. This is a period of the Charleston and all those wonderful dances, the foxtrot, the dances of the period. So you're really making a mistake by not developing it. And at this point, his sister made an excellent suggestion. She said, make this a jukebox musical. Don't have a composer write it for you. That's never going to work. Pick music you love from the period to tell the story, which Woody Allen did. Now let me pause and remind you that Woody Allen is also a very significant musician. He plays the clarinet. And every Monday night in New York, it used to be at Joe's Pub, and now it's at the Cafe Carlyle, he plays with a group of jazz musicians. And you know, he comes out, there's no star turn. I mean, they don't say, and now Woody Allen. And he doesn't come out in a tuxedo. He comes out in old wrinkled pants and an old sport shirt. And he sits and stares at the floor and plays his clarinet, never looking up. When it's over, he just sort of walks off when everybody else is taking their bows. And he goes out the side door, and that's it. But he's deeply devoted to it. He's so devoted to this that when Annie Hall was nominated for Academy Awards, the Academy Awards were going to be on Monday night, and he said, there's no way I can go to the Academy Awards because I'm playing in my band. I can't do it. So he didn't go. He went and played, went home, and the next morning, he met someone in the lobby of his building, and he never spoke to any. It was sort of a rule in the building. No one ever spoke to Woody Allen. They just pretended he wasn't there. He lived in a penthouse apartment on Fifth Avenue. And so, you know, they respected his privacy, and no one ever spoke to him. But someone rushed up to him and said, Mr. Allen, congratulations, you won 4 Academy Awards. And he said, what for? And of course, you know, he won Best Director, Best Screenplay, so it was a triumph for him. But he lives in a very different world. Okay, so when they put this musical together, they made a series of very smart choices. Okay, number one, Woody Allen, because he has this very strong musical background and love of music and knowledge of music, found perfect songs to put in the show. Not only are they right for the characters and the situation you'll see as it unfolds, but also then he's able, as I told you, to manipulate the lyrics so that they serve the story in a totally different way. I mean, we know Up a Lazy River, and we've heard thousands of versions of it, but you've never seen it as a version for a gangster driving someone to the waterfront where he's going to shoot him and throw him in the river. So, you know, I mean, he's so clever in the way the music is juxtaposed. The musical is much funnier than the movie. And in the movie, he took all of his great jokes from the movie, but he embedded them really deeply in the story, and especially in the music. So be very sensitive to that when you watch the show tonight. Now, the other thing, they then hired Susan Stroman to be the director choreographer. Now, this was really a coup. Susan Stroman, in my mind, is one of the greatest choreographers we have in the world today. She started her career doing Crazy for You in New York. She did a Christmas Carol in Madison Square Garden for 10 years. That show never toured. I would go to New York as a pilgrimage just to see it every year. It was so extraordinary. She loves chorus girls, and she loves big, leggy chorus girls, and she loves the theatricality of the way the theater used to be. And so that's always embedded in all of her choreography. And the other thing Susan Stroman does is she's so built into understanding time and place that she takes very seriously this period of the late 1920s. So watch the dance routines. They're all so refreshing, so delightful. They're all out of every old Broadway musical comedy that you loved. It's not derivative. She uses it in a very special, unique Susan Stroman-like way, but nevertheless, she gives you something absolutely dazzling visually to look at. Okay, now keep in mind, it was Susan Stroman who also directed The Producers. Now, Mel Brooks, as one of the other great comics of his age, was also the same kind of control freak that Woody Allen is. I mean, in Mel Brooks's case, if anybody had to say a line he wrote, he would not only give you the line reading of it, but every facial expression and all of the beats that go along with setting up the joke. He can't let his material go. So there is a wonderful story that no one's written about how Susan Stroman was able to take that power away from him so she could direct The Producers and choreograph it. And she did, of course, and it was brilliant. And so now the same thing is going to happen when she does Bullets Over Broadway. Here is Woody Allen, who controls everything. He doesn't let any, in his movies, he directs, he edits, he oversees the camera, he plays many of the parts, so, he can't give up that power. And so very interesting story. I'm very anxious to talk to the cast about this, about how they were able to relinquish the power so Susan Stroman could do it. But once again, she very strongly puts her hand on this show, and it's very clearly a Susan Stroman show. The dancing is wonderful. It's highly theatrical. She loves costumes and postures of the period. So watch every one of those little tableaus you see. They're almost like shots or moments out of the great old musicals. Very cleverly done. And then finally, what I want you to be aware of is William Ivey Long did the costumes for this show, and they're extraordinary. You remember him as the costumer for Cinderella last season, those brilliant costumes and those brilliant transformations that happened on stage. If you've been to the Playhouse, which I hope you will go to for the opening of its 100th season, Comedy of Tenors was also designed by William Ivey Long, and currently he's the designer of the show here. So he's really almost like our resident designer. He is the most famous costume designer in America today. And ironically, I do want to tell you, he started his career at Playhouse Square designing Stomping at the State in the early 90s, a young boy that I met in the early 80s coming for his first professional job. So he has a long history with Playhouse Square. And again, the clothes in this show are wonderful and wonderfully conceived and wonderfully integrated into the show. So you have a show that is a parody of sort of old-fashioned Broadway musicals. You've got to be prepared for the exaggeration, the bigness, the overstatement. Keep in mind, that's one of the bases of comedy always. If comedy is too real, if it's absolutely real, you wouldn't laugh. We live in a world right now where guns have an horrific reference for us. And, we can barely even say the word gun when we think of all the school children and people who have been murdered in classes, et cetera. And yet suddenly, every time we see the machine guns going off in the show, we laugh hysterically because it's heightened, because it's exaggerated, because it's bigger than life. And these characters that you see, there is a gangster in the show named Cheech. And by the end of the show, you're going to see the audience so loves him that they're with everything he does. It's like Sky Masterson in Guys and Dolls. And the more outrageous he is and the more terrible he is, the more we love him for it. That takes very special skill. And again, this is all Woody Allen's work of understanding what's funny, how to make it funny, how to set it up, how to create characters that are bigger than life in immediate situations that you can relate to. This show has so many different scenes, so you've got to keep tuning yourself into where you are and what's happening, and it's all done in this very clever, very slick way. So I think it's an evening that you're truly going to enjoy, and you're not going to be up a lazy river by any means in this show. You're going to be running wild by the time it's over. Thank you very much. Thank you.